Today's podcast is with a good friend of mine, Christian Kleine. Christian works for Ableton. He and I got to know each other when we were working together on preparing for the Live 9 release. But subsequently to that, we've just gotten to chat an awful lot. It's been really cool. In this podcast, we talk a little bit about his background, how he decides to go through the music making process, and what kind of tools and what kind of perspectives he takes when he's trying to make a release. I hope you enjoy this. I found it really interesting myself, and enjoy. Okay, today I'm going to be talking to Christian Kleine, a person who I consider a friend. We've had a lot of interaction in working with the Max for Live product, but he's also really experienced and very talented musician. I was enjoying this morning on Spotify listening to some of his old albums, but he's got a new one that came out recently as well. Hi, Christian. How are you?
Hi, Darwin. I'm fine. Thank you. And thanks for the honor of letting me taking part in this interview.
Oh, my pleasure. I don't know how much of an honor it is, but we'll see. So let's get started right away by talking a little bit about your background. One of the interesting things when I listen to your music, whether it's the new Shipbuilding album or some of your older stuff like the Real Ghosts album, it's a really interesting mix of styles. I mean, there's you hear hip hop influences, different techno and house influences, kind of indie rock stuff. You play a fair amount of guitar, I notice, and
right.
It seems like you pull together influences from all over the place. What's your background, and what kind of led you to that?
I think, the story goes something, in a short version, it goes something like this, that when I was a really young boy, I was forced to learn the classical trumpet, which was okay for a couple of years. But of course, when you get a little bit older, like in the age of 12 or so, you get more interested in something more rocky, I don't know, more subversive and so on. So I taught myself the electric bass and then switched over to electric guitar eventually later on. And we had a room where we could just made a lot of noise. And there was also a drum kit, so I taught myself also the drum kit, and I was starting to get really into punky new wave noise rock stuff, like when I was 15, 16 or so. So I was really into that. And I mean, later on, when I was moving to Berlin at the age of, when was that, 20 or so, I was already quite familiar with all music styles. So basically I was DJing techno music to my punk friends, and they hated it, of course, and so on. So I was really interested in all kinds of music all the time. So there was not such a thing like I'm only interested in a certain style of music or so. So to me, it was not really the style of music, but what a music has to offer in energy and in message and in whatnot. So it totally was independent from the music style. So, and of course, when I moved to Berlin, I did not have any room anymore to practice my noise drumming and guitar playing and so on. So I bought an Atari computer and started to make electronic music actually. And also I taught that myself to a certain degree, because that was like in the mid-90s, something like that. And there I found it pretty difficult to find a good starting point for electronic music, because I didn't know many people in Berlin. So I just tinkered around with all that stuff. And I eventually found a very early version of Cubase, which was called Steinberg 12. And it was a very early version of Cubase, as I said, which run on the Atari.
Right.
So I started programming on the Atari beats and synthi bass sounds and so on. But all the time I had this guitar band playing stuff in my mind, and I also missed it to a certain degree. And so I tried somehow to combine all these things I like with whatever music I do. So I'm really bad at just being a purist. because I just can't stand it to just stick to a certain format, to stick to a certain style or something. And yeah.
Sure, I understand that. Let me ask a question, kind of going back in that statement. You said that growing up, you had a room where you could make a lot of noise, and like you had a
Right.
drum kit. What? It sounds to me like, I mean, was this something your parents set up for?
Not at all. My parents didn't. I was completely. That was kind of really the anti thing to my parents. Also
Good. All right.
hated it, But it was like a youth center, something in that area, and
Oh, I see. Sure.
basically, you just a bunch of people could use this room for whatever creative things. Some people just hang out there, and I don't know, but some others.
Where was this?
This was in the very south of Germany, at the border to Switzerland, a very small town. It's called Lindau, it's an island in a lake.
Oh my!
It's very, very nice actually to be there. But of course, if you're a young person, you're not so much interested in how nice the nature is. That comes later in the life, but you're more interested in, I don't know, in influences and in absorbing all kinds of underground stuff and exploring, I don't know, whatever you consider as something which is more interesting than just ordinary small city life, so to speak.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So now, when you moved to Berlin and you got the Atari and stuff, I'm always curious. I'm curious to talk to people and find out when they sort of made a switch. I know for myself, if I and occasionally I do this, I go back and listen to things that I did long, long ago. And there was a time where I was trying really hard to sound like somebody. I was trying to sound like I was trying to sound like a certain jazz player, or then I moved on and I was trying to sound like the band Talk or whatever. And then all of a sudden something happened and the music switched and everything started to sound not like someone else's work, but like my work. When I listen to your music doesn't really sound like someone else's thing. It sounds like you have a voice, and the things that you do carry that voice. When do you think that happened for you?
Oh, that was a super clear cut, actually. I mean, when I started making electronic music with the Atari and so on, I was desperately trying to make breakbeat drum and bass sounds, because in the early mid-90s that was really exciting to me, because when I heard it for the first time, I was completely blown away by what kind of drum programming is that, or how does this happen? So I was completely mesmerized by what energy it had at this time.
Right.
And then I tried to do this, to recreate this with really spending nights in the drum roll, any editor and so on, to make this happen. And it was, the first attempts were really bad, of course, and then I got better, and then I really realized how all this works, because that's also the process. I think that you try to cover a certain artist or a certain genre, because you learn, it's much easier to learn than, of course, the technology and so on, the handling. But then there was a time where I was really understanding how this works, and I really was also thinking, this is leading me nowhere, and it's also not my music, actually. It's just music I do. I deliver it I participate in a genre which I partly like and partly not like, and so on. But I really was then interested more in what else can I do with the whole thing and so on. And so I was just then, there was a clear switch, really, which was almost within a week or so, I would say, that after 2.5 years or so of programming breakbeats, I was thinking, no, that it can't be it. That's not what is fulfilling me for the rest of my life, to program breakbeats. So, but I want to have something where I can draw my own picture, where I can just walk around and I don't know, take whatever image I have in mind or whatever feeling I want to culminate into music and make this happen. And the only way to get there is really to find whatever your own style, your own voice, your own technique, and so on is. And I mean, to me, that was quite soon clear that just by almost by closing your eyes, literally speaking, and just doing it without thinking about what would others say. Does this fit to a certain genre? Does this fit into a certain niche or whatnot? I don't care. I just make things which make me happy. And if by coincidence this others will like this stuff, then it's cool. But if others wouldn't like it, I mean, I still think I would continue doing that, because the main purpose to make music to me is really for not for others' sake, but just to express something where I don't have actually words for it. like
right. It's pure emotion instead of
exactly,
like thoughtfulness. Yeah. Well, it's really interesting that break for you came out of drum and bass, because I would say that for me that was about the same thing. When I jumped into drum and bass and started playing around with with manipulation of samples and really frantic programming, it was really an interesting technical puzzle.
Exactly.
But once I sort of cracked the puzzle, then all of a sudden I realized, well, this isn't my voice. This is a voice of someone 5,000 miles away who really feels this stuff, and I don't feel this stuff in the same way.
Exactly like me, and I think it's very functional music. It has really clear principles, and as you say, if you solve the puzzle and you know the principles, how it works, and then it's really, I don't know. Of course, you can lose yourself completely in this game of programming and so on. It's also very rewarding, but at the same time, it misses many other colors, and you never get to these colors. So basically, that's why I try to I don't know, not use genres, but when I have the feeling that I want to make a jazzy tune, because this particular way of music delivers a certain aspect which I enjoyed, and I just integrate it into my music as good as I can. But I'm not a jazz player, so
right. So, I hear you.
Yeah.
So with one of the things I'm curious about is when you're doing this stuff, how do you decide when the work is done? How do you decide when all right, this sounds the way I want it to sound? Because again, when I listen to the sort of the music that's available to me, which is your current album on Bandcamp and some of your older stuff on Spotify, again, it's there's some really beautiful stuff in there. But one of the things that I struggle with sometimes is deciding that a piece of work is done. How do you, since you have a lot of complexity but also a lot of variety in the stuff that you make, how do you decide when something's done?
That's a very good question, and there are some points where I can never come to a decision, and of course then it will never be released. But since I see music as like something like a short story, or also as a snapshot, more or less, because I really enjoy to finish songs, and I spoke with many other people who have really problems finishing stuff because they keep on developing, they keep on making loops or sounds or fragments. But I really like when everything comes together and falls into one place, and you can just then somehow round it off and make it done. Sure. And what I find interesting, that over the many years I make this music, I find it very hard to make really long pieces. So when I started making or finding my own voice, the music was really like 8 minutes. Pieces were 8-10 minutes long or so, and I just can't do that. So basically nowadays I can say everything I want to say with a song or a track within like 4 to 5 minutes maximum. So
I was going to actually ask you about that, because I was looking at the track list of Shipbuilding, and I noticed that every song is like 5 minutes and 20 seconds, plus or minus 15 seconds, except for the first song, Sun.
That's totally strange.
But everything is just like within this very short version of 5 minutes and 20 seconds.
To me, it's very strange that it's I don't choose that. It just happens. So I don't know why. But as I said, I mean, I find it very difficult now to make 8-minute pieces, or
Right.
also very difficult. I mean, I find it easier, of course, to make 2-minute songs, which are kind of, I don't know, interludes or something
Right.
like that. But I find it very difficult to make long, epic pieces because it has also to do with the fact, naturally, that the time I have available to make music is somewhat limited because, I mean, I work full time and stuff. And therefore, I want to have a piece of music finished maybe within 2 days or something like that. So basically, if I start Saturday to work on a piece of music, I would love to have it finished by Sunday evening, because of the fact that I can listen to it during the week. I mean, it's also as simple as that to some degree, of course. And I also often, when I look back to certain music pieces, which I revisit to make revisions and to make some more, to make adjustments or to make other parts different or so. Every time I try that, I fail almost. I mean, meaning what this means that the way I work, it happens within a certain time frame, and if I don't get it done in this time frame, well, I probably never finish this piece of music. So I don't know. It's kind of a struggle between to make it happen within a certain given time frame, and of course be happy with what I have within this time frame, and saying, well, that's what I have and I'm happy with it. And of course there are always little details I want somewhat to be changed, or the mix could be like that, or I don't know, this here could be another sound or whatnot, but that's probably not so important in the end for me than when I'm happy with the overall atmosphere, the overall result, whatever. Yeah, if that draws the picture what I want to draw, then I'm happy. Yeah.
Well, I just respect your ability to call something complete. I find it really frustrating. As soon as I get more than 2 minutes long, as soon as it's more than an interlude, my brain starts working overtime and telling me what I did wrong. Right?
I see.
It's like, oh man, the mix is terrible, or oh, if you would have had a better bass, or more active bass, or less active bass, or whatever, and I can talk myself into a swirl. I really appreciate your ability to sort of like keep that in. So for me, one of the things that I do to sort of change that perspective is I do a lot of collaborations. Mm-hmm. And I know in the past that you've done some collaborations. There was a Thaddeus, was it Herman?
Exactly, yeah. Herman and Kleine. Mm-hmm.
Herman and Kleine, yeah. And you've done you've produced people's albums and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Do you find working with a collaborator useful, or is it just too time consuming?
I find it useful, but it is too time consuming. I mean, it's really also like this that you saw my studio earlier. I mean, of course, it has a lot of equipment, and I want to realize so many things at the same time. So basically also things like, I don't know, I bought a marimba phone and I want to really record it excessively, but it's very difficult because it takes a lot of time and so on. But I totally enjoyed collaborating, but I also find it extremely time consuming. And I made very good and also bad experience with collaborations. So
yeah,
it's a time thing for me. It's mainly a time thing. If I would have the time, I would collaborate much more. But I must also say that priority is really for me to get my little short stories, AK songs done, because that's what's most important for me. And I would also, the experience to have played in a band was very good for me, because it was a completely different thing, because of course you're not so egomaniac then, and you can not only realize your own visions and dreams, but you have to hear and listen, and it's more like a conversation, of course. In the end I just care about whatever there is to listen to, and that can be a collaboration or a solo work. But of course, as I said earlier, the collaborations take so much more time, and I just can't afford it right now, at least.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, that makes sense. So with your most recent album, which when did that come out? That was like in May, right?
It was end of May, right?
Yeah. What was the process that you went through? Did you make a large number of tracks and then pick your favorites, or did you have a plan that you wanted to approach, and did you make like 10 tracks specifically related to that plan? How did that process go?
More or less it was like this, that end of last year I knew that I had 2 weeks off during Christmas, and I knew I would like to do nothing else but work on music. And also I knew that I would like to work not only without a plan on music, but to have like not really a goal that would be too far-fetched, but something like a round sum of tracks which I can somehow use for a certain purpose. In this case, the purpose was to make an album. And so I produced something like, I don't know, within these 2 weeks, something like 8 tracks. And then I had some time after and before that, the vacation time, where I had some other tracks. So I just ended up with like something like 14 tracks, and 10 of those I just used for this album, which, I mean, I found it always very hard to make a decision which track I use on an album and which I shouldn't use. And what I do in order to find those, I make something like beta versions or whatever you might call them, and I give them to close friends or not always close friends, also sometimes to random people I run into and just want to have their opinion. And it's very interesting what the feedback is from those hearings, actually. And I take that as an influence to make the final decision which track I use on the album. Because if I only have my own thinking, sometimes it's not right.
Right.
In the end, because I'm too close at the whole thing. Yeah. And it's very hard to get this distance, like the distant perspective. Because some tracks I'm really attached to, and I really want to get them out into the open. But if they don't fit on the album for whatever reason, then it's really pointless to make it. And for example, on Real Ghosts, I have this very harsh guitar track, which almost sounds like Shellac or Big Black or something.
Right.
Like that. And many people are really not so happy about this track, because all the time when this track comes, they completely shriek.
Right.
But I mean, it was a deliberate decision by me. But just to point out that this is kind of an important thing. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
so you actually use listeners as kind of a collaboration then as well.
Right. True. Yes, I do. Yeah.
So now, in making this album, I mean, for those of you who are listening, Christian took me on a Skype tour of his little studio room, and it is just awesome, the amount of gear he has. But one of the things that with the Shipbuilding album, you have it provides access to a Max for Live device that you created called a Tide synthesizer. Did you use that in the making of the album?
Actually, no, I didn't, which might sound strange.
Uh-oh.
But it was like this, that the Tide synthesizer was programmed after the tracks were finished. So
Sure.
I did the tracks first and then the Tide synthesizer. And to me, that was, I mean, you know, it was a nice gimmick actually to just, I mean, because I love to program these things, and
Yeah.
B, it was just so right. It felt so right to just include it into the album as an add-on or something like that, as a bonus track, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah. And
that's something that I'm surprised more people don't do, especially people that are developing their own tools. I always thought that would be an exceptional add-on for tracks, you know, for a release, to be able to say, well, here's not only a view into the music that I make, but here's a view into the process that I use as well.
Right. I mean, either that or be it just as I don't know, I remember in the late 90s, there were some multimedia CDs, which
Right.
had, apart from music and the tracks, they had some video or something like, I don't know, some kind of program which did some nice things. And I always appreciated this because it was kind of more value to what you have bought somehow. And if you don't need it, well, who cares? I don't care. And if somebody wants, I mean, I probably some people bought my album because they wanted to have the synthesizer, which is of course a nice side effect. So, I mean,
you tricked them into listening to your music.
I tricked them into listening to my music. Probably they don't want to, but now they had to, or they didn't have to. But I think it's just a nice gesture, and I think also it could be, as you said. I'm also I was curious because there are not so many people doing that, indeed, and I think there are so many ways you can nowadays combine these things. I mean, of course, there are so many people who are not interested in software, but just want to have some music. And then there are others who are like interested in both and so on. But I mean, generally, I think it's if you program Max stuff and so on, it's really nice to combine this with whatever other art you're doing. Like, I mean, because I use a lot of Max for Live also, and Max for making music. I mean, lots of granular effects and these kind of things I like to use, and either program them myself for my music, but I don't make a secret out of that. I mean, when I play live, for example, I love to show whatever I have on my screen to the public, because I'm just not interested in keeping that secret, because people are always interested in what you do and how you do it. And I, of course, I don't explain everything in detail, but I just make it available to see so that people can see the process. I mean, it's like a piano player where I can see the piano and the keys moving, and the piano player does not hide this usually from the public. So you can just look at it and you can ask him afterwards probably about some details also if he's willing to answer that.
Sure.
But that's kind of the way I see it.
That's an interesting perspective on that, because one of the things, initially when people were using laptops on gigs, they would kind of hide what they're doing because they didn't necessarily want to give away the fact they were using a sequencer or something like that.
Right.
And people fairly quickly made the assumption that, they're just checking their email and playing back a music track. And this sounds like, which some people do. But this sounds like an interesting alternative to that, which is instead of like either hiding the computer or using it for some kind of visual process, you just literally say, hey, I'll let you look over my shoulders while I'm working.
Exactly, yeah.
By letting you see what it is that I'm working with. That's a really interesting approach. Talking about the Tide synthesizer actually allows us to talk a little bit about some of your other work with Max for Live. You are the very large brain behind the creation of all of the drum synthesis tools that came out with Live 9 Suite, correct?
Right. Mm-hmm. Correct. And some of the modulation devices like, I don't know, envelope, MIDI, LFO. Yeah. I mean, of course, we were like a team and we created them on a team base, but a bunch of those I did on my own. The drum synth I did almost completely on my own with, of course, help from people. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, it was mainly my brainchild. It started actually out because I always were interested in synthetic drum sounds. So it started out, I wanted to make an analog impulse, like one device which made 8 sound, something similar to what you have in Plago.
Right,
I mean, this little drum synthesizer, but a bit more advanced and so on. But then immediately my colleague said, well, just make individual cells and so on, because then you can combine it in a drum rack and Ableton and so on. And so this whole project started. Yeah, and I was really deep into drum synthesis to a certain degree, which was kind of interesting.
So what kind of synthetic drum tools have you used in the past? Like for myself, I went through a period where not only did I have standard analog drum machines like the 808 and the CR78, but I also went out and I bought a lot of drum brains. So I had like the brain part of a Simmons drum, and Pearl made one, and I actually had a number of different Simmons units. I had the old Tama series. I really loved those things, but they were kind of hard to interface with anything.
Yeah, true. I mean, I same here actually. I also I have a SDS7 from Simmons, which is really
Oh,
interesting,
that's beautiful.
and
Yeah.
and then the Syncussion from Pearl, and which is really really nice. And then of course a bunch of drum computers, the analog drum computers,
Right.
and so I mean the whole, and also I mean I must say that many of these things I somehow learned to program then on the Nord Modular actually, because there it was pretty easy actually to make these kind of sounds because they just have also almost ready-made modules for it, so to speak. So that was kind of a starting point in the early days, actually, the early Nord Modular for this kind of stuff. But I really thought that this is kind of missing in Ableton, that there's, I mean, there, of course, you can program with any synthesizer drum sounds. I mean, and there's operator where you can use to program drum sounds. But that's really, it takes a lot of time. And if you change one parameter, you end up with just a white farting sound, white noise fart sound or something like this. So that was kind of the reason why I wanted to have like a dedicated drum synth module in Ableton Live and Maxwell Live. And yeah, I mean, and I'm quite happy with the result. I mean, and we all learned a lot on the way about, I don't know, things like, I mean, was a big project because there are 13 instruments actually, and if you stick them all into one track, into one drum rack, it takes up a little bit of CPU. And when I started it was really bad, and now it's really good. So there was a lot of effort was made to make this really nice working, and now you can really work with that stuff. And also if you attach like a drum kit to it, like and you play it as a like a Simmons,
Right.
which you can do.
Right.
That's also a lot of fun actually, and I did do that and so yeah, really nice project.
Okay, so before we go further on that track, I have to say another thing that the listeners won't actually see that I'm looking at right now is your avatar on Skype, which is a really large bear playing drums. Is there a story behind that?
I must say there's no story behind that. It's just a random picture I found on my completely messed up computer desktop.
Okay, well, I have to tell you that if you have a picture of a bear behind a drum kit and there's not a story behind it, that's almost as scary as if you had a real story behind it.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't have most people have their own picture on Skype like you do, but you have also kind of a white on white picture.
Right.
And I don't know, it was really just a coincidence that I found this picture. I mean,
because I thought maybe you were like part of a band that had to dress up like animals or something, and I was sure there was going to be a great story behind that.
yeah, could be. Maybe I forgot about it.
There you go. So getting back to the Max for Live development, would you say that working with the Nord modular was actually a precursor to working with Max? Did you use that before you started getting into Max?
No, I didn't. I started with Max actually pretty early, like something like relatively early, 1999 or something like that. And before that, I tried out like the early native stuff. It was, I think, Generator before it was Reactor.
Generator, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And I tried out Super Collider, the versions and so on. But then I came to Max just because it was really nice and I found it super interesting. And all these, I mean, the early stuff was to make crazy FM sounds. So that was kind of how I started to work with Max. But I mean, in those days, I was just beginning learning Max and so on, also just with the purpose to make my own effects and stuff to add to my music, actually, to add as a individual note to my personal music. That was the main purpose for me to learn that. And but it took me quite a while, and in those days I was not really able to make convincing, I don't know, bass drums or something like that. It was too hard for me. But so, and the Nord modular was just, I mean, as I said, it has these ready-made modules, and for these kind of things, it was super easy to make. And of course, it's much, Max offered many more possibilities, but you have to learn to deal with those. Actually.
Well, and at the time in 1990 or 2000s, the speed of computers was such that you wouldn't have been able to generate an awful lot of sound out of MSP in comparison to a Nord modular.
Exactly. I mean, this had this DSP thing is inside, and I mean, it did nothing else, and you always had to do with the computer other things, like, I mean, running your DAW and stuff like that, and all kinds of things. Yeah, that's very true. Of course, that's another thing. Yeah. But I mean, so it was not really a precursor, but it was kind of also to learn basic principles of synthesis. It was really a very, very nice system, the Nord modular system. Yeah.
I have to admit that I kind of miss it being part of the landscape. I wish that they had continued with that, because I thought it was a really powerful paradigm, and it was different from what everyone else was doing, and so I thought it was really interesting.
I agree. Yeah, and I mean, there was nothing like it, actually, as far as I remember. I mean, of course, there were things like Kuma or so, but they were A, too expensive, and B, too alien for me, at least.
Yeah, I had some really bad experiences with the Creamware stuff, so it was not. I did not get along with it very well, unfortunately. All right, so where do you think you're going to be taking stuff in the future? What are you already sort of like planning another release, or was that sort of a big shot and you're going to take a break? What do you think is on the horizon for you?
The next thing, which is actually in the making, is something which leads us back again to the 1999, 2000 years. So I'm releasing some unreleased stuff, which I just dig through all my DAT tapes, and I have tons of DAT tapes. So I found many, many really nice tracks which I never released because they didn't fit onto the first album and the second, but they are, looking back and hearing them now again after 10 or 12 or 13 years, I think they're really, really nice. So I released them like in November on my Bandcamp thing, because I now completely believe in this do-it-yourself approach, because I don't use music labels anymore, although I would like to have, of course, a vinyl record, because I'm a vinyl lover. But still, I completely think that Bandcamp and things like that are really nice. Of course, you have to make a lot of promotion work in order to get yourself somehow heard in this very noisy times. So, yeah, but that's the next project. And then, of course, I have some new material which I composed during the summer, but I don't think I will release that this year. So it will be something like, I don't know, early next year, maybe March or something, where I will have either another LP ready, hopefully. I'm not sure yet, but at least an EP, which is also nice. But I mean, I'm pretty more or less productive because I'm really disciplined. So more or less every weekend I really spend producing music, and not only producing music, but really writing songs, actually. And I really enjoy writing songs more than, that's why I don't have a modular system, a pure modular system, because it just would keep me from really writing music. And
we're going to get you. Don't worry. We're going to get you.
That's why I have semi-modulars.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there is something with a modular system that the joy of patching is so great that actually then taking that material and turning it into song is somehow unsatisfying in comparison to just making a new patch.
Exactly, and that's my fear, and that's why
it's a good fear to have, frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, and as far as programming, have you been doing anything particular or peculiar with Max for Live development that we might be able to see?
Also, yes, some new approaches in how you can control things in Ableton, for example, some kind of a gesture device which does use gestures in order to translate them into control data, which is kind of fun and interesting to use. And then, of course, I'm really into these crazy pitch shifting, noisy, whatever effects, which just make strange sounds. I'm really into whatever otherworldly and strange sounds you can somehow produce, because that always keeps my imagination to a certain level, and I need that somehow.
Sure, absolutely. That makes sense.
Yeah, so I have a bunch of those devices ready, actually, but I need to have I'm reluctant a little bit to just throw them on maxforlife.com or so, because I want also to kind of promote them, not for money or so, but more to draw again attention to my music a little bit in the world or so. Because again, I think it's nowadays, as a single do-it-yourself releasing artist, more or less hard to get some attention in the media, actually in magazines and stuff. So if you have something to carry that, which is software or something else, or be it a good story or whatnot, but if you have something, it's way easier. So I'm kind of using that as a vehicle or a Trojan horse again. Yeah, and I think that's why not? I mean, I'm thinking
it makes sense. It makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Christian, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you talking to me. This is really fun. It's really interesting to see how much of our background actually aligns. I'm always interested to hear that as well. Any last words?
Last words? No last words. That would be...
It's interesting. Almost everyone I ask, when I say any last words, they're like, no. So there you go. Another chalk mark on the blackboard. All right. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye. And there you have it. I hope you really enjoyed that one, and look forward next weekend to the next podcast. In the meantime, if you or anyone you know needs to be interviewed for this podcast, please let me know. Drop me a line at ddg@cycling74.com, and I'll be happy to pull in whoever I can get my hands on. This is really interesting to find out not only what gear and what processes people use, but also how they think when they do their work. So, thanks a lot, and we'll see you next week.